Hi guys, so I hope everyone's keeping well with everything that's going on. While we're all kind of inside, I thought I'd try and share some tips and tricks around Logic. The other day when I put out the questions, a lot of people were asking how I go about writing an idea. So I thought if I record a track from start to finish, which I did yesterday, then I'll show you a little bit more of an insight into how I work. One thing to bear in mind, these are just how I work. They're not necessarily the best ways of doing things. So if you guys know anything that I don't, please put it in the comments so I can learn a little bit as well. I've broken that down because it was fairly long into like bite-sized chunks, and I'm going to be posting them probably one a day in the hope that I can help some producers who are starting out, and yeah, we can all learn something. Today I thought I'd start with just basically how I organize a track and how you can create a template, because I think this is something you can use every time you work, and it will just speed things up in the studio so that you can get more creative and don't have to worry about this kind of thing. When I load up Logic, I'll show you how it comes up. I'll show you what I have in my template, what it's there for, and try and go into a little bit of detail for those who don't use certain things. And then we'll go about how to create a template from scratch. When I open up Logic, it kind of asks me what I want to do. I always choose create a new project from a template, and then you'll see when it opens up, there's two. You've got my one from last year, and you've got my newer one. So if I open up the newer one, and you'll see that it will immediately give some kind of structure. On here, I've got my kick, topper, bass, pads, pianos, leads, vocals, and effects. Now, not every track is going to have every one of those, but it's much easier to just delete one of these if I don't need it than it is to recreate it every time. I've also, for those of you who use sends for your effects, I've got a send set up with a small reverb, a longer reverb, and a delay, so I don't need to put those into every project. Just to show you what's on each of these buses, I use a lot of plugins which aren't necessarily on Logic, but where I can, I'll try and give you some kind of Logic alternatives. Unfortunately, this first thing, there isn't really an alternative, but for most of the other stuff there is. So the first thing that I've got on every single one of my buses is this Slate Digital tape emulator, and it basically runs all the sounds through tape, so the whole mix at the end will have a much warmer sound. As I say, unfortunately Logic hasn't got something built in that does that, but I can show you what there is for the other things. Then at the top of each one, this again is Slate Digital, and it's kind of a mixture of a few things. Now the thing at the start of it and the thing at the end, you don't need to worry about. They're kind of just showing you the level that's coming in and out, so that you're not kind of increasing the volume of it massively. These here are both just EQs, and this is a compressor. With the EQs, although they're not necessarily doing anything right now, just having them turned on will give the sounds that run through this a bit of a character, because the ones in Slate are all replicating the old desks. So it will give it a bit of a sound of that desk just having it turned on. Obviously, if I then need to EQ, I can kind of add stuff in as well, but that's not something you need to necessarily worry about this moment in time. This one here is just a compressor. Now, what's quite nice about it is it's got a dry wet. So if I put it to 0, you're not going to hear anything this compressor is doing. If I put it on 100%, you'll only hear what is going through the compressor. Now this one, I've got set up to compress really, really hard, to the point where you probably wouldn't want to listen to the sounds just running through that. But if you use a technique called parallel compression, you can basically just send a tiny bit of the signal. So if I only send like 5% of the signal to this, it just makes the sound of whatever you've got running through here sound a bit bigger and a bit beefier. And it's quite a common technique to make basses and kicks and things like that sound bigger in the mix. So I have that set up automatically. If you want, in another video, I can kind of go in a bit more detail over that. The final thing here that I've got is just a compressor that is on the whole bus, and that I've got turned off on every channel just because every track's different. I'm going to have to change the threshold and the makeup gain depending on how loud the signal is. So I'll leave them turned off until the very end and they're there for me to use. Finally, on the master channel, I've just got a few of the things that I quite often use and they're ready to go. For those of you who don't use buses, just to explain that very briefly before we go on to making your own template. But all it means is if I was to add, let's just say, a synth into here, basically it will group things together. If that is my lead, I will normally, instead of it just going straight into the output, I'll just go to the bus and I'll send it to my leads. That will then mean that all the sound of that is going through this lead channel. So you can kind of group everything together. So once you get a rough mix, you can kind of turn down your kick, or you can turn down all of the percussion that you've got in your topper all at once. And you can obviously compress them all together, which kind of glues things together a little bit. To get your buses to show in here, because by default they won't show in this window, the easiest way is if you just click on this automation here. By default, it won't be turned on, but if you turn it on there, it will just appear in the window. It will appear like this, so you won't have anything on that channel. The only reason I add these like sections is because if I was to do a load of automation, so if I was to say put the volume up and things like that, if I then move all the instruments, like all the pianos along, it's not going to move this automation with it, which then gets really confusing and it takes ages to do it. So if you right click on this channel, like I just did, I'll do that again in case you missed it. So if you just right click on the channel and put create empty MIDI region, you can drag that out across it. And then the reason it's useful is because if I then move everything, it will say, do you want to move that automation? And it just makes life a lot easier. Now that I've kind of shown you how I do it, let's go about making one from scratch. If I hit don't save there. Now what you're going to want to do, just make a new project. It doesn't need to be a template or anything. Add in anything that you might use. So if you are going to use buses, you can just send something as an output. And if I go into my mixer, you'll see that I now have this aux on bus 10. So I can name that drums or whatever I'm going to do. As I say, to show it in this window here, I just click on this and it will appear. And then, like I mentioned, I will put something in there, just an empty region, so that I can move my automation. If you don't need this, you can obviously always delete that as well. If you then use sends quite a lot, let's say you always use the same reverb, you can just send something to a bus, put on whatever it is you use. So you've got like a Logic one in here. Now, in terms of what I used in my project, on my buses, I had some EQ and I had some compression. Obviously, you can just use the basic Logic stuff for that. There's no reason why not. You could have an EQ set up there. And you could also, Logic's got a load of different compressors in here that you can play around with. If you're not sure where to start, there's always some really good presets as well that you could start with. Set it to whatever you would normally use. Again, if you don't want it on by default, you can turn that off. And I'm just going to name that delay. I don't normally show the delays and stuff in here, but if you wanted to, you absolutely can by just pressing that and it should appear. Now, once you've done everything that you'd want to do and that you think you'll use in a project, obviously I imagine it's something that will change over time and you might change this every now and again. Once you've got what you want, just go right to the top, and instead of saving like you normally would, you just go save as template. And you name it whatever you want. So I'm just going to put demo. And then if I close Logic, I don't need to save what I was working on, that's fine. Whenever you go into Logic and you get given the option, you can go into your templates, there you go, and you've got demo, and the minute I open that, it will appear, and it will just make your life a lot easier. You'll find when you're doing projects, you use the same things over and over, and hopefully this will just make it a little bit quicker for you when you're working. I'll post the next one up tomorrow. That will be more on how I work on the track and things like that. But as I say, any tips for me, just put it in the comments, and I look forward to sharing one with you tomorrow.